Helman pulled into an abandoned plot in the ramshackle town of Hobbiton. A sign at the property suggested that the owner had unfortunately not been able to keep up with some sort of project and had left the town for pastures new. Helman decided that it would be the ideal spot to wait until he could escape the town under the cover of darkness. As the clock of the Great Hall struck midnight, Helman decided that he needed to make a break for it if he were ever to reach Castle Tempelhof in time. He roused the 4 Ghorst brothers and started again on his journey. As Helman approached the western border of Hobbiton, he could see that the patrol of peasant farmers and zombies were just as prolific as it had been on the eastern perimeter of the village. Helman would have to burst through the outer defence and make a dash for it. Ideally, Helman would have stopped and fed his brothers some particularly quick brains to instill them with the required vigour and speed to break through the patrol and escape to the dire forest. Unfortunately, Helman did not feel that he would have time to do this, and he did not think he had a cadaver on his cart made of the right stuff. He would have to take the risk, roll the dice as it were, and cast Van Hel's Dance Macabre to provide his brothers with their extra speed required to break through the outer patrol. Helman cast the spell and felt the sudden surge from his brothers as they made a supernatural dash for it. As Helman's cart burst through the town's western gate, he knocked an unsuspecting peasant farmer and 2 patrol zombies to the ground. Helman heard the shots fired by the farmer, but alas, it was too late. Helman had escaped to the village and was well on his way again. Helman rode through the night. As he emerged from the western edge of the dire forest, he noted a change in the gloomy light coming from the east, marking the beginning of another day. Sylvania had long since been covered in a perpetually thick blanket of cloud, and it was often difficult to note any difference between night and day. He would make it to Castle Tempelhof in time. As Helman passed the last few trees, he looked ahead and saw the imposing outline of Castle Tempelhof emerging from the top of the craggy mountain. The once proud keep had long been abandoned by humans to the ghosts and creatures of the night. In times gone by, one could expect a hearty welcome in Castle Tempelhof. Even when the local nobility had abandoned their impressive homestead, the castle had remained in use for passing dignitaries and people of note. As Helman made his way across the road leading north from Tempelhof, he recalled fondly his encounter with one of the last inhabitants of the Castle Tempelhof. Helman clambered out of the plague pit and wiped off the entrails of the village's dead from his robe. He had spent several hours amongst the cadavers of Tempelhof in a bid to escape the torch and pitchfork-wielding villagers that were hunting him down. He had tried to bring his father back from the dead using a spell copied from one of Nagash's ancient tomes. On reflection, Helman was not sure that sacrificing cats was the best way of ensuring that the spell had the required oomph to bring back his departed dad, but that is what the creature Igor had told him to do. As he made his way towards his home, he saw smoke rising from the garden. The villagers had burnt the screaming body of his father before making their way across the fields to the Ghorst family mausoleum to look for Helman. He knew that he had little time before the villagers returned to his home. Helman thought that the villagers were more likely to notice if the treasured Ghorst horses were missing, so he quickly harnessed the family's 2 oxen to the cart. Along with the sparse provisions he was able to gather, Helman loaded the bodies of his 4 brothers onto the cart. He would not let the villagers take them away from him as well. Helman whipped the oxen like a man possessed and made his way north as quickly as he could. He knew, as he left the village behind him, that it would be a long time before he returned home, if he were to return home at all. As Helman rode north, he became increasingly tired as the pace of the escape diminished. He realized that it had been a very long time since he had properly slept. He needed to find shelter soon to rest for the night. The dire forest would provide him with sufficient cover to hide from any Tempelhof residents that pursued him north, but the abundance of wolves and dark creatures that called the forest their home made Helman acutely aware of the fact that he only had 2 oxen, and they would be a tasty morsel for any such creature. All residents of Tempelhof had heard the tales surrounding the castle that gave the village its name. Since it was abandoned by the local nobility many years ago, more and more stories of ghostly figures and hauntings had emerged about the creepy keep. The dead did not frighten Helman. It was the living that he was more concerned about at present. Having spent the last month living with the cadavers of his father and brothers, each laid out in the Ghorst family kitchen, and having spent a full day and night hiding in one of the Tempelhof plague pits, Helman's humanly aversion to death had long since been banished. Helman decided that the castle would be the ideal place for him to rest for the night. He doubted that the villagers would look to follow him into a place with such a fearsome reputation. With that, Helman led his oxen off the main northern road and headed west to the unholy keep. The courtyard of Castle Tempelhof was deserted. Helman noticed a small set of stables leaning against the northern wall. He tied up the oxen and covered the cart loaded with the dead bodies of his 4 older brothers, with some blankets that he found stored in the ramshackle livery. Helman entered the main building of the castle in a bid to find either a bed or a room which was a little more protected from the elements. Helman climbed the impressive staircase up the main entrance hall of the castle to the first floor. He wandered along the dusty corridors, looking into the seemingly desolate rooms, looking for a place to rest his weary head. As Helman approached the fifth door on the corridor, he noticed the flickering glow of firelight emanating from the room. As he peered around the door, he was amazed to find an impressive library with a roaring fire ablaze in the ancient hearth. Beside the fire sat an impressive, if pale-looking figure, who examined Helman with hungry-looking eyes. "And who might you be?" asked the stranger in a voice thick with a foreign accent. Keen to avoid leaving any trace of his being there, Helman quickly thought of an alias to provide to the strange figure. "My name is Jonathan Harker. I'm a solicitor from Templehof, travelling north to make my fortunes," lied Helman. He did not see the stranger move, but in the blink of an eye he was no longer sat in the fireside chair, and Helman felt talon-like claws digging into his throat, and a breath on the back of his neck that reminded Helman of the stale air that filled the mausoleums of Templehof. "I do not appreciate being lied to, young man," snarled the man in Helman's ear. "I am Manfred von Karstein. I am sure you have heard of my reputation, and know that I will not hesitate to snap your neck if you do not tell me the truth." Helman was flung into one of the chairs by the fireside, and Manfred took his place opposite him. "Start talking." With that, Helman told the Count of the death of his family, attempts to raise his father from the dead, and how he was now on the run from Alberic von Corden and the angry villagers from Templehof. Manfred clearly either saw promise in the young Helman, or at least the burning hate and madness in his eyes. Over the next 2 months, Manfred took Helman under his sometimes literal wing, and began tutoring him in the subtle arts of necromancy. Over the course of Helman's training, Helman grew to hold a great deal of respect for his vampiric master. At the conclusion of his training, Helman decided to swear fealty to the Count. As a reward, Manfred presented the young necromancer with a used copy of a book of necromancy for Helman to continue his studies. As he made to depart, Manfred explained that he had been travelling through Sylvania in search of clues as to the location of Nagash's lost tomes. He had heard rumours that one of the books had been discovered by someone in Templehof. Helman realised with a start that he knew exactly who his master was talking about. The creature Igor said that he had copied the spell given to Helman from one of Nagash's tomes. Helman excitedly told Manfred the location of Igor's cottage, and of his experiences with the friendly ghoul. Manfred was amazed that the location of the creature had been under his nose this whole time. Helman decided that as Manfred was about to leave the castle Templehof in search of Igor, he had better depart as well. He had probably loitered near to Templehof for longer than he should have anyway, given that he was being hunted by the damned witch hunter. He determined that he would travel further west through Sylvania and try and find somewhere where he was not recognised, and settle down to the business of bringing his brothers back from the dead, not as mere zombies, but as sentient beings. It had to be possible. Helman uncovered his cadaver-laden cart from the stable and went to fetch the Ghorst family oxen. It soon became apparent that the poor beasts were no longer capable of drawing Helman's ramshackle ride. 2 months of confinement to the rotting stables of Castle Templehof had left the beasts sickly and weak. Helman was beside himself, and he could not think of what he could do. Seeing his young apprentice's predicament, Manfred offered Helman an unorthodox solution. "As a reward for helping me track down Igor, I have decided to present you with a further gift, young Master Ghorst." Helman watched as Manfred fastened an ancient-looking bell to the back of his cart. Once attached, Manfred struck the bell, and, bidding Helman a fond farewell, mounted his horse and left the castle. As Helman watched his master ride away from the castle, he realised that he could still hear the sharp tone of the bell in the air. Turning to face his cart, he realised with a mix of elation and horror that the corpses of his 4 brothers were twitching on the back of the cart. Could it be that Manfred's final gift to him had been that he brought his brothers back? Given the power of his master, Helman was sure that they could possibly be sentient and immortal, like the famed Ark in the Black that Helman had heard so much about. His 4 brothers clambered down from the back of the cart and began making their way forward. Helman smiled at the thought that he would soon be reunited with his 4 brothers. Suddenly, to Helman's horror, his brothers took a sharp step towards each other. In doing so, each of his brothers impaled themselves on one of the pieces of wood protruding from the front of his cart, previously used to bind the cart to the Ghorst oxen. Helman let out a horrified scream. He disgustedly watched the rancid gore of his siblings' long dead innards spray onto the stone slabs of Castle Templehof's courtyard as the wooden spikes burst out of the zombies' chests. With that, Helman realised that he would never be reunited with his family. If he could not be with them as he had once been, Helman would at least ensure that his family name would be remembered. Helman knew there was no going back. He would make his name as a great necromancer. In order to do so, he would travel west from village to village, killing and raising as many zombies as he could. He would become a master of the black arts. As Helman re-entered the courtyard of Castle Tempelhof for the first time since that fateful night, he noted the flagstones by the stable where his brother's entrails had been spilt all those years ago. Helman dismounted his cart and made his way to that exact spot. As he stood in the place that brought back those distant memories, he allowed the pain and anger associated with them to well up inside him. The strength of those emotions would be key to his undertaking ahead. He allowed his emotions to mix with the winds of magic and began the incantation of binding. He allowed his mind to expand and envelop the entire castle. Helman sensed the spirits and dark creatures that now called the Castle Tempelhof home, and bound them to his will. "Come forth," he proclaimed as he finished his spell. Helman opened his eyes and watched as numerous creatures began to scuttle down the walls of the keep, out of broken windows and from atop the battlements. Helman felt a drop in temperature and watched as the air in front of him writhed and condensed into ghostly forms. From deep within the keep, Helman heard the unmistakable scream of a dying woman. The trip to the unholy castle had paid off. Helman's army had been swollen by the inclusion of ghouls, spirit hosts, banshees, and even 3 colossal Vargeists. Helman wanted to get his reinforcements to the border of Tempelhof as soon as possible, in order to ensure that he stood the best chance against the impending force of Alberic von Corden. Helman decided to load the Vargeists with the banshees and spirit hosts, and fly them to the battlefront as soon as possible. As he commanded them to return to the village, Helman was so elated at his success that he found himself cackling and crying, "Fly, my pretties, fly!" at his Vargeists as they flew into the distance. Helman was confident that he would make it back to Tempelhof ahead of Alberic von Corden, even with the small collection of ghouls slowing him down. However, as he left Castle Tempelhof, Helman now wondered what the battle ahead would bring, and whether he could finally triumph over his embittered enemy. Only time would tell.